Okay, I think we are about to start. Welcome everyone. I hope you're enjoying the World Press Freedom Day conference. We have had many interesting discussions yesterday and the day before and today. Now the topic that we will discuss is the critical role of journalists, scientists and artists in tackling the triple planetary crisis. My name is Malene Nielsen Monsour. I am Deputy Permanent Delegate of the Danish delegation to UNESCO, so I'm based in Paris. My boss is Ambassador Mr. Martin Bille Hermann. He would like to be here today as well as Denmark's UNESCO ambassador, but unfortunately he was not able to travel to Chile, but he sends his greetings to all of you. We will focus on three things today. We will focus on how to protect professionals that covers issues related to biosphere resource, professionals, man on the biosphere site managers, journalists, scientists and artists. We will also focus on how to facilitate their access to information so that they can cover stories from biosphere research. And we will also focus on how to counter mis- and disinformation. And the UN system, especially UNESCO, is a really important key player in this. And UNESCO has a number of key tools that we will explore today and see how we can move the needle to do even more with these wonderful UNESCO tools. So we are very privileged to have UNESCO leadership sitting here together with us on the scene. We are also very privileged to have the Executive Director of the UN Environmental Programme, who will send us a message on the video. And we are very privileged because we have UNESCO colleagues here, we have UNESCO experts, and we have experts from the field. And all of us will discuss in 1.5 hours. It's not a lot, but we will at least get a snapshot into what is our vision, what are the tools at our disposal, and what are the experiences that we have already. But without further ado, I will get back to further introductions. We will start with a very short video message from the Executive Director of the UN Environmental Programme, Mrs. Inger Andersen, and I hope it will be put on the screen.
Environmental defenders are nature's truest allies, and journalists and artists and scientists are some of the most important defenders that we have. Today, on International Press Freedom Day, we're reminded of the critical role that they play in addressing the triple planetary crisis, the crisis of climate change, the crisis of nature and biodiversity loss, and the crisis of pollution and waste. And we're also reminded of the fundamental role that they play in holding power to account. Environmental journalists unearth stories from illegal logging and mining to pollution and land conflicts. They raise up voices of the underrepresented communities and provide access to critical information. And scientists communicate the facts without prejudice or agenda. They sound the alarm on the state of the world. And artists create art that connects us all on a deeper level to the damage being inflicted to people and to our planet. And yet, oppression of these defenders is increasing. In 2022, at least 88 journalists were killed for just doing their job, which is a sharp increase on preceding years. Journalists are being detained now more than ever. And online harassment, especially towards women, is reaching new levels. Physical attacks, arrests, legal action, and smear campaigns are now a daily reality for artists, for scientists, whose only crime is communicating the perilous position that our planet is in. So we must address this deeply worrying trend. In today's fast-paced, misinformation-driven world, we must put in place new safeguards that defend, protect, and empower these vital voices. Environmental journalists, artists, and scientists are ultimately environmental defenders. Today, we recognize them and their work while committing to protecting their freedom.
So, thank you very much to the Executive Director of the UN Environmental Programme, Mrs. Inger Andersen. And as you can see, this is a UN family where we recognize the important role of nature, the important role of professionals like journalists, scientists, and artists. And UNESCO has a very special mandate here and very important tools. UNESCO has a special mandate to protect and promote biosphere reserves. UNESCO has a special mandate to protect and promote journalists, protect and promote artists, and protect and promote scientists. And we are so lucky that those leading these important areas are here with us today. We have Assistant Director General for the Communication and Information Sector, responsible for media freedom, the safety of journalists, and for organizing the World Press Freedom Day every year, Mr. Tawfiq Jelassi. We are so lucky also to have on a video message Gabriela Ramos, who is Assistant Director General for Social and Human Sciences, responsible for scientific freedom, UNESCO's work on scientific freedom, and UNESCO's work on the safety of scientists. Here in person, we have Director Gustavo Moreno, also representing social and human scientists and scientific freedom, safety of scientists. We also have Ernesto Otone, Assistant Director General for Culture, responsible for UNESCO's work in the area of artistic freedom of expression for artists and their safety as well. And if I may, also former Minister of Culture for Chile. Thank you so much also for Chile hosting this wonderful and very important conference. And then we have also Antonio Abreu, who is representing UNESCO's natural sciences sector and director of the UNESCO's work in the area of biosphere reserves. So as you can see, what we're trying here, our mission is to break down the silos, and we know that UNESCO is a front runner in this area. We have 4 different sectors here. We have the communication and information sector, culture sector, natural science sector, and social and human science sector. So thank you so much for being here in person. We know that the challenge is huge. We have a triple planetary crisis. We have an erosion in human rights, not least in the area of freedom of expression and the right of access to information. And we have a massive spread of mis- and disinformation that is very harmful. The future is not set in stone. We know that we can help shape it in a way. And that's why it's so important that we have you here, UNESCO leadership, to tell us your vision as we move ahead towards 2030 and beyond. So we would like to invite you to give us your vision and also your wish list, if you wish, on how stakeholders can help UNESCO in your action as we move ahead. So I would like to give the floor, first and foremost, to Tawfiq Jelassi. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Malin. Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for staying on at this conference, World Press Freedom Day 2024. I think this session is extremely important. It's thanks to the great work of the permanent delegation of Denmark to UNESCO, which has initiated 2 years ago, I would say even more than 2 years ago, this important piece of work. And this is the book they published consequently, Critical Voices. And they are organized actually 2 years ago at Punta del Este in Uruguay, on the margin of our 2022 World Press Freedom Conference. They organized a session on this topic, and since then they have advanced with this issue of the critical role that journalists, artists, scientists could play, and what can we do together to foster their safety. Malin mentioned, I'll talk about journalists, and of course my colleague Ernesto Otoni will talk about artists, and then we'll have the view about scientists. So let me for now stick to journalists, although we know very much that all these professionals are on the front line. Journalists through their reporting, investigative work to bring the truth to the world, but also scientists, and we saw a vivid example of that during the COVID pandemic and the key role they played to advocate for vaccination, and of course artistic expression that is also so important. So important because keep in mind the overall mission of UNESCO from 80 years ago, to build peace in the minds of men and women through education, through culture, through sciences, through information and communication. And more specifically for us, how to promote the free flow of ideas, the free flow of information, the free flow of knowledge. And here we see again the three sectors, or the professionals, scientists, journalists, artists, and educators, very much contributing to that. You mentioned, Malin, some of the new challenges we are facing. The challenge, of course, of the denial of scientific facts, the challenge of disinformation, the challenge of hate speech, but also the threats that these professionals face in the conduct of their work. You heard the figures yesterday about how bad it is for journalists, an increase of 44% in the number of journalists being killed during the exercise of their profession. You heard also about the alarming impunity rate for crimes committed against journalists. It is 83%, means more than 8 cases of journalist killings go unpunished. Very alarming figure. And unfortunately, this part of the world, Latin America, is among the top countries where journalists have been systematically targeted, attacked, whether it is online violence, whether it is physical violence, whether it is murders. And this is why we are here again in Latin America, to advocate, to preach, but also to join forces, because we need a strong voice to support these journalists. Let me very specifically say what UNESCO has been doing as far as the safety of journalists. UNESCO has initiated more than 10 years ago the United Nations Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists. Not only we have initiated that, but we have been the lead UN organization implementing this plan of action for the safety of journalists. Now, of course, we have entered the second decade of this plan of action, and we plan to do more to support journalists and safeguard their work. How to do more? How can we combat mis and disinformation and hate speech? We have conducted in 2022 and 2023 a major project, which we called For an Internet of Trust. How can we make sure that the information on the internet and on digital platforms and social media is a public good, not a public hazard, not a public harm? And this work, which has followed an inclusive multi-stakeholder approach involving the tech companies that operate the platforms, but also member states of UNESCO, academia, research institutions, civil society, NGOs. This work has received more than 10,000 inputs from these different stakeholders, inputs coming from 130 countries. And it culminated with the publication last November of the UNESCO Global Guidelines for the Governance of Digital Platforms. And there are specific chapters and principles on how to combat disinformation and hate speech. Principles like responsibility, transparency of the algorithms used by the platforms, accountability to other stakeholders, oversight bodies, user empowerment, moderation and curation of the content. So we don't amplify the harmful online content. Otherwise, we will end up with the online Wild West through the internet, and we don't want that. So this is, I mentioned 2 actions, to be brief, and let my colleagues, of course, tell us their views and their actions. The UN Plan of Action for the Safety of Journalists, the UNESCO Guidelines for the Governance of Digital Platforms, and of course, a conference like this one, with thousands of participants, to keep advocating, but also joining forces to make sure that journalists can carry on their work, that we improve their safety, because as Maria Ressa, the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize, said it, without facts, there is no truth. Without truth, there is no trust. Without trust, there is no shared reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these powerful words, your vision, and also explaining a bit the multi-stakeholder approach.
developed with CI, and thanks to their support, we compared different methodologies that were being produced in terms of communications and resources for journalists to think how could we apply this to artists in the world? Because it's urgent. Because we receive every day, we receive calls from many countries, from our member states, where artists are still being incarcerated for what they say, for their opinions. And that's not really something that shows up in the media, unless it's a specific writer who is very well-known or a particular environmental activist. But today, the artist's right to express their opinion, which is what we expect from an artist, someone who's questioning society, is at risk today. So what we believe, and this is one of the tools that we've been developing since the Mundial Declaration in 2022, where over 150 cultural ministers signed and sustained that declaration. One of the main actions in culture and heritage was cultural rights. That was one of the central topics in terms of for the creators, understood as the audience's right to culture, as well as in the sphere of platforms in terms of numbers. So freedom doesn't just mean that an artist has the right to express themselves freely, but it also means that today, in terms of digital platforms, is that cultural diversity is also fostered. So all voices have a space. So all voices can be heard. And that right is not guaranteed today. I would say in around half of the countries in the world, it's not only a democracy issue. It has to do with cultural rights that should be guaranteed. And in that sense, what we're pushing towards is, first, it's the work we're doing in terms of the global report that is inspired by it's taking from all the reports that we've developed over all the conventions, immaterial heritage, material heritage, cultural diversity museums. But we also believe, and this report is going to be presented in 2025 in the next conference in Barcelona in October of next year. This report is going to take all of these elements from which all the states have been reporting on with a perspective, with an analysis that is both qualitative and quantitative, as well as a critical analysis to see where are we falling behind, where are we not gathering the efficient data on this topic. Whether it's environmental, if it's minorities, if it's indigenous peoples, in several topics, even sexual diversity. We don't have those numbers. We haven't asked those questions. Sometimes we can't because the states don't allow us to. We need to change that. And another reason is because we don't have the tools. So if we have this report, the idea is that we can find what is the information we don't have at hand, so we can better defend cultural workers and journalists. So when you're talking about a wish list, and I'm going to end on here in this point, one of the most powerful ways we have of influencing an agenda is that this new construction, and this is what's happening in the Pact for the Future in September, is that culture that in this 2023 agenda doesn't exist. Culture doesn't exist in this agenda. It doesn't have an objective. It doesn't have a target. Okay, we want to be in all of them, but we all know that when you're in everything, you're in nothing. So, as we've been working and we hope this is something that comes true in the next year, is that we have a specific target for culture for next year. And this specific target that we're going to work on the next conference, conference, is aimed at defending and securing cultural rights for everyone, for those who are producing and who are participating. And that's something that is going to occur, that happens out of experience, out of collective efforts, and also in all of the efforts that we've been doing in terms of natural heritage. And the ADG of natural sciences and World Heritage Sites. So it's a very big task. We can only do it when we're working with tasks, with states, civil society, and member states that are also working, not only just representing institutions, but finding individual voices of those creators, of those artists that bring about beauty. Places so beautiful as this one, as GAM.
Thank you very much. Very inspiring and important points that we will keep in mind as we move ahead on the discussion. And also thank you for mentioning natural heritage sites, because that's true. Today we are focusing a bit on biosphere reserves, but the UNESCO would like actually to have this narrative of UNESCO nature sites. So that covers, of course, also what you mentioned now. Over to you, Antonio. I think it's the first time that we have the natural science sector together with the other sectors that you have traveled all the way. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to Denmark for promoting this event, and thank you for my colleagues for facilitating or complicating my position, because I have not much to say now after these initial interventions. And I was trying to be disciplined and to find a way of not repeating, but also benefiting for what I listen, so this will be much easier. I think that, in fact, we live in a very complex, accelerated, and different world that we are not sure where it is going, and we are not sure if our institutional capacity, positioning, knowledge, capacities are able to cope with the challenges, but also to cope with something that we are used to do in a different way, because we have an analytic process and mental positioning that maybe needs to change a little bit, because we don't have time to follow the usual equation, because maybe when we have one or two solutions, the reality changed already. So it's so fast. And that is the challenge. Maybe the key words will be to look at UNESCO. This was the question. And what is the role, and how can UNESCO address this? Maybe the words that I found is about renew and reinforce the positioning. Because the mandate is very clear. I think we are well positioned to address the challenges, and UNESCO can play a pivotal role in promoting, because the challenge is sustainability and resilience across the planet, and resilience of human systems, social systems, economic systems, and natural systems. And this is about sustainability. This includes education for sustainable development, scientific research and innovation, cultural diversity, natural diversity as drivers for sustainability. And this is the question that we have. So when we prioritize initiatives that mitigate climate change, preserve biodiversity, and promote sustainable development goals, we can lead, and we can at least identify paths and ways of safeguarding our planet for the next generations. So maybe we have a communication issue here, that is, how can we do this from each sector, and how can we better use the instruments and tools that we have already in our hands? And this is the case of biosphere reserves, world heritage, just to give an example, because these places, these sites, they are living things, they are tangible things, they have people, they have natural assets, they have an understanding, they have dialogue, they are dialogue platforms. So how can we bring this integrated perspective and views and knowledge and respect and all the tools that we have into a daily thing that is happening already as a process? And how can we extrapolate from there and learn with the best cases and success cases? Because we are good in communicating the worst cases, disasters and calamities. We are not so good in sharing the successes that we are doing. And there are many cases. So I will say that harmful disinformation, especially in this digital era that we are living, it's a risk for democracy. It has a double role. It can exacerbate the worst of us, but also it can shape and lead in combating the way we are communicating about what we do. This involves also partnerships and coalitions, and this is what biosphere reserves, geoparks, and World Heritage sites are. So they have a multidisciplinary, integrative approach that are based on dialogue between science, knowledge, whether new, innovative, or traditional one, that brings together the public sector, the private sector, that brings, for instance, for biosphere reserves, conservation as a pillar of socioeconomic development and not something that should be put aside and excluding human and human activities. So these are the challenges, and I think it's a big responsibility that all we that are in this room, in our offices, we understand, but the challenge is how can we make this a daily concern? And I will finish with an example that we were discussing in the coffee. Most of the focal points for the MAP program, the Man and the Biosphere program, or for the World Heritage natural sites, I'm speaking on biodiversity and ecological systems, they report to UNESCO, and when they report to the CBD, that is the Convention on Biological Diversity, they tend to forget. They don't mention both sides. The national reports for Biodiversity Convention doesn't include, in most of the times, a word on UNESCO biosphere reserves. That is just 300 million people in 748 sites that in the core areas are hosting the most important and relevant ecosystem services, hotspots of biodiversity. So if CBD is not willing to recognize or not benefiting from the role that we are doing with member states, with scientists, with UNESCO chairs, with Category 2 centers, with all sectors that are working together. So there is something wrong here, and this is why we need smarter communication, more effective communication, and the mistake is not outside, is inside. So we should look at us and see how can we position ourselves better and sharing the work that we are doing, the information that we have, and we need support from media, from technology, from policymakers, and this is my wish list. So how can we better bring together and be more accountable of what we do? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for these words and for asking us questions. How can we, which is important in this process as well. So thank you so much to UNESCO leadership for setting the scene. We have a pretty good idea of the direction, and we will keep that in mind. We will now invite UNESCO experts to come on the scene, and thank you so much for your contribution. So now, as we are changing for a new set of distinguished speakers here, I think I should move one seat. I would like to ask the audience to look on the screen,
Check.
because what you see on the screen is a QR code And this QR code will actually is for you, audience, because we would like you to engage with us in this global conversation that we are kicking off today. So if you scan this QR code, you are able to you are able to ask questions for the next 30 minutes. You can either formulate your own question or you can like a question that has already been asked. And then in about 30 minutes, our speakers will try to answer your question. The idea is we would like to really have a global conversation with our panelists, but also with you, audience, here today, but also in the future. Because our plan as a permanent delegation of Denmark to UNESCO is to conduct a desk study. This one has already been mentioned today, Critical Voices, and we will do a new one called Critical Roles. And all the discussions and the thoughts that we receive from you here today will feed into that process. So please don't hesitate to use the QR codes. And we know that we are a bit behind schedule, so the questions that we will not be able to answer today, we'll keep them and we'll bring it on in our work on the desk study. So don't hesitate. And now here is a distinguished panel of representatives from all UNESCO sectors. We have representatives who work to protect and promote the Biosphere Reserve, Serena Heckler and Fabien Bourlon. We have experts representing UNESCO's work on the scientific freedom and safety of scientists and experience from the field. We have colleagues Sylvie Courtet and Victoria who will represent journalists, and we have Rosario and Tiago who will represent the role of artist. So, and I will be asking questions, and we will start with the Biosphere Reserve colleagues. So UNESCO has 750 biosphere reserves, which is a huge potential. Can you elaborate, Serena Heckler and Fabien Bourlon, what are the assets of biosphere reserves, but also what are the challenges that you face? And Serena Heckler, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for organizing this panel to the government of Denmark. It's a real pleasure to sit with colleagues and experts from all of UNESCO's sectors and be able to talk about the importance of working on all of these issues in UNESCO Biosphere Reserves, because my job as a coordinator of the network of biosphere reserves in Latin America and the Caribbean is really to talk specifically about the issues that occur and all of the dynamics that occur in implementing biosphere reserves in this region. And one of the challenges is the huge diversity, both cultural and ecological diversity that we find in these biosphere reserves. But I think one of the things that we need to keep in mind is biosphere reserves are often thought of as protected areas, but they're much more than that. They have a conservation function, which is one of their primary functions, but there are two other primary functions. One of them is a sustainable development function, and the other one is what's sometimes called a logistical function, but I think of as a knowledge production function, because it involves education, it involves research, and it involves also working with indigenous peoples and local communities to ensure that their knowledge is integrated into the management of biosphere reserves. And really the idea with biosphere reserves and supporting it from UNESCO's perspective is to support this huge network of incredibly knowledgeable, technically able stakeholders to implement the biosphere reserves in all of these functions. And of course, for obvious reasons, the role of scientists as investigators and knowledge producers, the role of artists as also knowledge producers, but people who can communicate that in a really powerful manner, and the role of journalists to shed light on the challenges of biosphere reserves is really crucial. And I'm going to focus on an example of something that we've worked on since 2020 in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I want to thank the Assistant Directors General and the directors who spoke in the previous panel for making this really easy for me to talk about. It is an example that threatens not only human rights, but also the very conservation objectives of the biosphere reserves and the Man and Biosphere Program. This project to look into the environment defenders, the human rights violations of defenders of biosphere reserves was triggered by a series of high-profile murders of biosphere reserve stakeholders in 2020, and we carried out this study from 2020 to 2022. And I might add that we're also working very closely with other actors who are working on these same issues, such as the Escazú Accord and the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. And when we did this study, even though we were aware of the shockingly high global witness figures that have been cited or referred to in the previous session, showing that Latin America is the most dangerous region in the world for environment defenders, we were really shocked, even ourselves, by what we found when we began talking to biosphere reserves and MAD programs in countries across the region, from the north to the south, all across the region. We found that in the Amazon, in the Mesoamerican corridor, in the Andes, in the Chaco, these issues are affecting virtually every single biosphere reserve that I have discussed this issue with. And one of the things we found is, of course, murder is the headline issue that people talk about. When an environment defender is murdered, that makes headlines. But this is only the tiny tip of the iceberg. For every person who's murdered, at least 90 persons are harassed, including harassed digitally, are threatened with violence, are intimidated. And this is all, one of the things really focused on, is all facilitated through a general and public discourse which puts, of disinformation, which puts environmental conservation at odds with economic development. And this discourse is prominent, and we found that it is strategically used to support the rights of the actions, sorry, not the rights, the actions of bad faith actors in the biosphere reserves. We've got drug cartels, animal and human traffickers, illegal miners, and then lots of operations that are sort of operating on the margins of legality and illegality, who are pillaging these remote areas to support their economic ambitions. While anyone that champions environmental rights and conservation can be seen as the enemy, rendering violence against them possible, acceptable, or even desirable. And so it's in this context that we see high-profile deaths such as the journalists Dom Phillips and Bruno Pereira a year or so ago in Brazil, and Berta Cáceres, and thousands of activists who have been killed in the past 10 years. And finally, scientists such as Omer González Gómez and Raúl Hernández Romero, two conservationists who were murdered in the Mariposa Monarca Biosphere Reserve in Mexico in 2020, seemingly over their attempts to prevent deforestation of the Biosphere Reserve. What UNESCO can do? Well, we identified a strategy, and I'm really pleased to say that this was a work that we did together as colleagues working on the Safety of Journalists program, UNESCO's Safety of Journalists program, and colleagues in our social and human sciences who were sort of working on the freedom and safety of scientists to pull plans and ideas from these programs, which are so well established and have done so much in UNESCO, to identify a 4-point strategy: improve monitoring and documentation, as has been mentioned, to do capacity building on self-care and management of security, including cybersecurity, to improve judicial processes and reduce impunity, another issue that's been highlighted, and most importantly, to work through UNESCO's programs to denormalize violence against defenders of the environment through advocacy, education, and normalizing peace, good governance, and valorization of conservation as a democratic process. So in conclusion, just to say that we must support scientists, artists, and journalists to implement the Man and Biosphere program and the Biosphere Reserves as the heart, the main benefit that we have in this program, and to carry out their important work without paying the highest possible prices. And I am eager to continue to work through the Critical Voices Initiative and with colleagues across UNESCO to continue to further this and make this a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Irina, for sharing the work of the Biosphere Reserve and also for presenting these very worrisome trends that, but very important that we put them on the table and that we discuss a way forward. Fabien, over to you.
Yes, thank you. I will speak in Spanish in honor of the place we are in Chile. So, well, I'm glad to hear the work. Estoy feliz de escuchar.
I'm very happy to hear about the work that's been doing in throughout UNESCO. I'm going to talk about one of the reserves here in Chile. There are 10. We are in the extreme south of Chile, the Laguna San Rafael Reserve, and specifically it's a place that it's wonderful. It's one of these places that we really want to protect, because especially because there's an ice structure that is very relevant, and it has an ecosystem, an environmental ecosystem, and that's why it was created in 1979. And throughout the years, one of our challenges today is how we can make this, people can value this in terms of the community. We were lucky to be awarded a fund in the Aysén region. I'm a researcher in residence in the Patagonia, and our role is to coordinate these processes so the community can empower themselves. I'm sorry about that. So it's how to empower them and to protect this reserve, not only in the elements that we're debating today, the ecosystems or the communities that we want to protect, but also to understand that protection is also born out of mutual comprehension, understanding. As scientists, we not only need to give the information to start the conversation, but it's only valid in terms as long as the community finds them valid. So we're very lucky to feel that we don't have we don't have political pressures. We have freedom of the press. We have a freedom of speech. Yet our journalists and environmental activists are also under pressure, because every time they speak out, certain interests are put into question, especially mining and the salmon industry that occupy this ecosystem based on a specific interest. So of course they support the development of the region, but how can we do it so that it supports everyone's interests? So in terms of this specific biosphere in Laguna San Rafael, we're trying to establish a dialogue with the environmental groups, local communities that also take advantage of this specific and unique place in the earth. Because when you're dealing with a reserve, it's a special place. Someone said, "Who are we?" I feel like I'm a Patagon. I'm from the Patagonia. I've been living there for 25 years. But what really connects me with the place is water, the resources. They all make us Patagones. If we don't have that relationship to the land, with that ecosystem, that vital ecosystem, ancestral communities, specifically Mapuche, they understood that a long time ago, but we've forgotten that link. So the work that we're doing in Aysén, we've also invited people to speak Mapuche communities to speak. Some people say that, they're not from Patagonia, but actually lots of them, the Cahuéscar, Alacalufe, they've unfortunately have disappeared. They were eradicated by the colonizers. So we have to create this space of dialogue, not only in terms of tourism or culture, but because it's fundamental for us to understand that our relationship to our natural environment is what makes sense to what we're doing. It gives meaning to what we do. These places are vital for our soul. So what do? We do actions. What does that mean? Not just talk about things, but to facilitate research where people can participate, participative research, where very young people can come and learn about science and in the field, not just in the lab, complementing the field with the lab, with environmental activists, how they can co-create an environment that is also based on emotions. Science also needs emotions. But we formulate science from our emotion. My hypothesis comes from an emotional place. Science is coming from people. The not science is also important to bring to the table. And a very practical example is how we do that. We invite anthropologists, we invite loncos, Mapuche heads, and who have maybe complementary ideas, and we have a conversation, and that transforms into action. So we're placing value on these initiatives in the territory where we feel what we feel is correct. These gatherings between different peoples, entities, and that's how we can make better decisions. We're not here to tell people what the final answer is. We don't have absolute truths, but to call attention to the challenges that we're facing, and we can make collective decisions. That's what we've been doing in Patagonia. Thank you so much for this invitation, so I can promote this work where scientists, artists, and journalists are working together. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much both to Fabien and Serena for explaining the MAP program and the challenges. And it's very clear that science is a main feature in the Man and the Biosphere program. So now I will move over to our science people. Gustavo, knowing that biosphere reserves is one of the areas where we have scientific research going on, but also where scientists, it becomes dangerous. We know UNESCO is working in this area. Gustavo, please tell us, what is UNESCO doing? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Malena. I will follow the example of Fabián and Ernesto Torna. I will speak in Spanish. Muchas gracias por estar aquí nuevamente. Gracias.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to the Denmark delegation for organizing this event and for inviting us. Yes, after me, Yannick Gerard is going to speak, and she's going to be able to give more information. She was a co-author of this report. So I would like to invite you. Soon we're going to publish safety for scientific research and typifications, threats. I think it's going to be very relevant. The speaker who follows my speech will talk you more. She's an author of this report. It's very important. We have dedicated a large part of this event to talk about safety for journalists and journalism. My colleagues have spoken about the freedom of speech for artists, but scientists also have a fundamental task in making advances, social advances, and that's why we also must protect it. And some data, I can give you some more. Janneke will share more information, but 1 out of 2 women scientists mentions that they have faced sexual harassment at work. Around 40% of those working in areas, climate-related topics. They've also faced harassment via internet, online, and social media. 22% of researchers receive threats, violent threats, after speaking to the media and during the pandemic on COVID. And we have over 400 documented attacks of higher education institutions between 2022 and 2023. And the effect plays out very differently. It could be sexual or attacks or online, or there can also be frivolous lawsuits, attacks that are coming from groups of power in terms of judicial or litigation. So to stall research, to limit the topics or of research. As UNESCO, we seek to face these threats with our new program and safety for scientists that has 5 components. First of all, linked to working with member states through different regular contact communications and ministry and contact with ministries. In second place, gathering data and monitoring information through periodic reports and demanding public policy that is based on evidence, evidence-based public policy. Like the MOST program, this seeks to link research and public policy. A third item is increase land work on the field, especially in Latin America. And fourth place, advocacy, recognizing this topic in great events such as this, through general education, informing the audiences, etc. And finally, gathering funds so we can secure these recommendations in all of these other in all of these spheres. And this program is going to be enriched by what with our call to action that was well received by UNESCO, the Executive Board of UNESCO, responsible for the governability with 60 countries showing support. And this offers a comprehensive framework for different countries, for UNESCO, and for all stakeholders in science and those seeking safety for the scientific community. We're here available to continue talking to those who are interested in knowing more.
Thank you very much, Gustavo, for giving us the components of UNESCO's important new program and the work that you intend to do. Let's hear from Professor Yannick Geras, as Gustavo mentioned. She has a message for us on the screen.
Good day, everyone. As you may have heard, we have recently written a report for UNESCO on the safety of scientific researchers. Essentially, what we did is to conduct a review of all available international reports and literature and draw some lines. In particular, we identified a number of different types of threats that scientific researchers may face in their everyday work. And in this short video, I'd like to give you a snapshot of them. Grouping our findings together, I think we can see 3 main types of threats and violence that people might face. So first, the bodily integrity of researchers may be harmed. For instance, because they are deprived of their liberty or physical injuries are done. Second, they may experience material damage to their research facilities or intellectual property rights. And third, people may suffer psychological damage in terms of fear or a general sense of unsafety. And what we have also seen is that all these threats can be very tangible or real, but in some cases even a perception or a sense of unsafety can already be a risk to scholars and scientists' freedom to conduct research. So that, of course, is a distinction according to the type of harm. But we have also made the distinction according to responsibility for the harm. Most importantly, we distinguish between external and internal harms. External unsafety thereby stems from outside the organization where a researcher is working. Here you may think of government interventions or prosecution, but also of harm done by private actors, such as an armed group. By contrast, internal unsafety comes from within the organization where the researcher is working, and for instance may have the form of a dismissal or a loss of career opportunities. We've seen in our study that these risks can be faced by all researchers in all situations. But we've also identified a number of situations in which they can be even worse. For instance, there is an increased risk in particular contexts, such as in emergency situations, or for researchers working on particularly sensitive topics. And on top of that, we can see that researchers from underrepresented groups, such as minority groups or early career researchers, are specifically vulnerable to all such threats. So what we think is that this typology of threats is useful, as it can help focus particularly policy measures to particular risks or groups. We really hope that UNESCO's program on the safety of scientists can contribute to that, as well as to collected minds today. I wish you very fruitful discussions on this highly important topic.
Thank you very much to Professor, and thank you to the Netherlands, who has had a really strong role also in promoting this agenda. Let's move on to UNESCO work on journalists, and especially because it's very clear that mis and disinformation is something that has a chilling effect. We've heard that. Can you highlight, Director Sylvie Caudray from UNESCO, how UNESCO provides guidance on how to work on this and misinformation and how to protect and promote the work of journalists? So first of all, UNESCO Director Sylvie Caudray, over to you.
Thank you very much. So let me just put some context, background. UNESCO has worked extensively since a long time now on safety of journalists and the fight against impunity since the 90s, the beginning of the 90s. 10 years ago or 12 years ago now, we have decided to work together with different stakeholders because the phenomena was absolutely becoming something urgent that we need to tackle, and we realized that it was impossible that only one organization or different efforts all around the world would work. So we have created this UN plan of action on safety of journalists and the fight against impunity. And it's a multi-stakeholder plan of action, meaning that it's UN, so we have all the UN agencies, mostly, of course, UN, OHCHR and UNESCO who are co-leading this plan, but also other agencies, UN agencies, who can, depending what topics we are working on, are involved in the process. We have also, including member states, of course, the academic world, the judges, the police, law enforcement institutions, parliamentarians, which is quite new, and also the academic world. So what is the objective of this plan? Let's be short. It's what we call the 3P: prevention, protection, prosecution. Meaning that we have different actions. For example, we have advocacy work. This kind of World Press Freedom Day conference is an advocacy work because it is a time when not only UNESCO but also NGOs are releasing their report. They are also making campaigns against on some specific subjects, as we did this year on environmental issues and the lack of protection of journalists, environmental journalists. So big campaigns around key days, World Press Freedom Day, the International Day Against Impunity, but also the International Day on Access to Information, where it's also a time where we can speak about shutdowns of internet, for example. So advocacy work, we have also research, data collection work, which is extremely important. So we have this academic network who is making some research, specific research. We have the World Trend Report in UNESCO, and we have specific resources also on handbook for journalists, training of journalists. For example, there is a handbook on how to combat fake news, how to cover climate change, or how to cover elections, which is also a time where you have a lot of disinformation and misinformation. So specific topics, I think we have a series of 20, 25 handbooks, but which are dedicated to universities, but also school training for journalists or new journalists. Another aspect of this work is the monitoring of the killings of journalists. We are the unique UN agency monitoring the killing of journalists, but more than monitoring the killing, monitoring the judicial process. So after, unfortunately, the killing, we are asking member states, where are we with the judicial process? And the Director General is making a report every 2 years to the International Programme for the Development of Communication. And when I say it's unique not because it's unique in the UN system. Of course, NGOs like Reporters Sans Frontières or the Committee to Protect Journalists have also their own monitoring process. What else? Capacity building. We have established some mechanisms, again, national mechanisms, multi-stakeholder mechanisms for the protection, prevention, and prosecution. I can enter into details after. Safe Space Center also in crisis. For Afghan journalists who have fled the country, we have established a Safe Space Center in Pakistan. In Ukraine, we have some Safe Space Center within Ukraine, but also outside in Poland. For Sudan, we have now established one in Eastern Africa, in Nairobi. The same in Central America, in Costa Rica. So this is very important because journalists, exiled journalists, can continue to work, and the safety is very important, but also the psychological safety is also important, and the professional work is also important for exiled journalists. What else can I say concerning? This is a UN plan, I can enter into details. Another program which is linked to the fight against disinformation is the media and information literacy. And this is a program which is becoming more and more important at UNESCO, not only at UNESCO, but also in UNESCO, because we tackle the users, we try to empower users, not only with competencies, with skills, but also with the development of critical thinking. And this is one of the main objectives of this program. And more we are going to work on MIL and generative AI. This is something not new, but which is quite new in terms of implementation. So this is a very important program. And finally, the guidelines in terms of disinformation. Jealousy spoke this morning about the guidelines, so I don't know if I need to enter into these into details, but it's linked to the how to implement governance in the platform and to keep freedom of expression and access to information as the more important aspect of this fight against disinformation. So yes, we need to tackle disinformation, but we also need imperatively to protect freedom of expression and access to information. So it's these guidelines are linked to the curation and content moderation in terms of transparency, accountability, blah, blah. I can continue, but I will maybe I should stop here, and if you have any question, I can continue.
Thank you very much, Sylvie. I think your intervention shows that this is a very, that you have so many tools at our disposal, and it's very good for us to know so we can use them and put them into play. Thank you. Let's move on to experience from the ground, and Victoria, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So as a journalist, I will speak from behalf of Ukrainian journalists, and I want to say that the biggest threat for us from Ukrainian journalists now is war, and not only because it's a direct threat to our lives, and not only because every journalist is a target for Russian soldiers in Ukraine, but also because it takes a lot of human sources, and many journalists are involved in covering of war topics and topics of environment, biosphere reserve, climate change, and other nature protected areas. They are faded onto the background. However, there is still a pool of journalists that are interested in environmental topic, and some of them are harassed by Ukrainian officials, and I'm aware that personal information of some journalists were collected by officials and distributed to a wide range of people to smear their reputation. And the journalists, they did investigative journalism, environment investigative journalism. I'm involved in solution journalism and environmental solution journalism, and for me the biggest problem is access to the territories. Because the last year I was made research about 8 biosphere reserves in Ukraine, and I had no problems to visiting 4 of them. They're on the western Ukraine, and it's quite safe there. But 2 of them are occupied now, and I have no ways to get there. One more is on the war zone, and it's under attack every day. It's on the Ukrainian-Russian border, so I can't get there because it's too dangerous for us and too dangerous for our team. And the second and the last from the list is Danube Delta Biosphere Reserve that is on the south of Ukraine, and I faced with absolutely unjustified ban to access to these territories because it was closed by our government, and they said that it's state secret there, and now civilians, now photographers, and even scientists can get there to collect information from the place. So it's absolutely closed now, and and also a manager of the Biosphere Reserve, he said that he wouldn't give any comments to journalists during the hostilities. And I was shocked about it, so we don't know what exactly is going here now. So that's it, is the problems, and it's a lack of information about biosphere reserves. But I found a solution. We collected data from the people who live on the territories, from the scientists who work there and scientists who work remain. We used design technologies, we used NASA instruments to identify fires there. We used satellite images to find the places where the fires were. And also we used online maps to see the movement of cargo ships in a real time. All of these instruments I know by my mates and friends that are scientific and eco-activists and environmental activists, and I think that my experience shows how important is collaborating between journalists and scientific communities, because if they will, because networking is the main thing that helps me to find information about that place. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing this information, and also very important about the access to information if journalists are to cover stories from the biosphere reserves. Let's move over to the role of artist, and Rosario, working at UNESCO, will you like to start, please? Thank you.
Yes, so I will speak about the role of artists, but also, well, Tiago is here. He will speak also more in detail with some examples, but I thought from UNESCO's side, our support to artistic freedom and also some entry points for collaboration based on the report that iba a hablar en español, me acabo de acordar, en base al informe que el
I remember that I will speak Spanish. So there's a guideline here. So, many of the topics are common for these three sectors. Actors that we're trying to protect. I will start by saying that the media, mass media, are fundamental allies in our work about artistic freedom. Because considering that organizations, specialized organizations, the monitoring of artistic freedom are just a few with fewer resources. So they get supported in the media coverage. And as Mr. Ottone mentioned, the media coverage of this topic is not enough. So this also applies for human rights violations of artists, scientists, I'm sorry. So it's really important to support and train the media so they create awareness about the role of artists, the role of scientists, and also journalists when talking about environmental topics and the threats and attacks that they are suffering. We shouldn't fall into an utopia. Media are also part of the problem, and they move the public opinion. They do it through some defamation campaigns, misinformation, and behind them there's some created interests. So what Sylvie mentioned about alphabetization, it is really important in order to create resilience in society, in order to know where this information is coming from, where we're talking about literacy. You shouldn't read everything you read, and it is important to promote media landscapes where there are some independent media doing a fair and plural coverage. Talking about this, just to move the public, it is important to coordinate actions for solidarity defending these three groups of professionals we work with. And we need to facilitate some connections between academic communities. We have talked about different research works, and I didn't know about them related to environmental defenders. Yesterday, it was launched this report about attacks that journalists suffer when they're working in environmental topics. So it would be interesting to connect these communities, organizing some gatherings. So, from a gender viewpoint and minorities within these three groups, we need to see how, the rights are being violated. It was also, I wanted to mention it, but I want to emphasize this. We need to work with legal stakeholders. Before the session, there was one session by the High Commission of Human Rights. It was about SLAPs, strategic lawsuits, and the main topics there in these lawsuits are environmental ones, whether they are from the UN, from stakeholders or actors or the private sector, business, companies. So working with judges, lawyers, against this prosecution, legal prosecution of these groups is very important. And in that sense, we need to unite forces with actors such as the High Commission, Human Rights Commissioner, Relators for Freedom of Speech from the UN, OCDE, and the African Union. They may do a lot about this topic, but there's no connection, strong connection between them, especially with artists. With journalists, there's more connection, but the information doesn't really flow as it could between these different organizations that started working on these topics and these mechanisms that are there available. The UN relator, when talking about cultural rights, there's a report about the participation of science, which are things that we're talking and covering nowadays. And the relator for human rights defenders and environmental defenders were also here in this meeting. So just to conclude, we need to create awareness. There are some different groups we can work with, and there are mechanisms, international mechanisms, which are some other regional national ones, and some UNESCO mechanisms, for instance, related to artists, the Convention of the year 2005 for promotion and protection of diversity of cultural expressions. Monitoring, artistic area should be monitored. Integration of culture in development, sustainable development processes. That is not something that, it is something that we can promote even more. We can provide more information. And also the monitoring of this recommendation of 1980 about the condition of the artist. Not only member states, state parties can participate, but also NGOs. And the last point, coordination, international coordination in emergency situations and also in specific situations where risks against these groups are higher. There are some instances of coordination where they share information about who are the ones at risk, what is being done. They share some list of beneficiaries, so there is no duplication of effort. There's also collaboration in these visas, relocation of these stakeholders. I think I exceeded my time. Thank you very much.
Rosario, thank you so much also for pointing out that we actually do have mechanisms. We can be better at coordinating, but thank you. Over to you, Tiago. What is the role of artists in all this?
Primeramente, muchas gracias por la invitación. I'm going to speak in English. And I just thought it would be interesting to share with you that a few years ago, I learned from an indigenous artist from Brazil. Her name is Shirley Krenak. To introduce myself as the biome where I am from. And it was part of a performance that she was doing. And she asked everyone in the audience to introduce themselves to each other. And from that moment onwards, as the biome where you are from. And that by doing that, we start remembering that connection of ourselves and nature. So I am the Atlantic forest. And after that performance, I started thinking, I discovered that the Atlantic forest is a biosphere reserve, and I discovered as well that 80% of my territory, of who I am, has been destroyed. That only 15% of who I am still exists, still remains. And I think this is really interesting way of remembering, you know, by the practice of connecting who we are to the place where we are from, where we come from. It's something that we are made to forget. And you start bringing that consciousness of that what you do to the planet, you're doing to yourself as well. So I thought it was an interesting story to tell in the beginning, because it was also something that came to my mind yesterday when another artist, Gael Garcia Bernal, in the plenary said something that was really beautiful, that if we put a meaning to something, we don't destroy it, we defend it. We must fall in love with nature again. And I think this is so beautiful, and it's one of those things that what artists can do, you know, in a world where it's shrinking, it's all about disinformation, disengagement, divisions, you know. I think that artists have this superpower, these qualities of, you know, holding so much complexity and trying to translate it in a way that is so simple, so direct, that speaks to our hearts, to our souls, to our minds, that can create the behavioral change that we need to see. So I prepared a list of things for us that we work in the cultural sector. I think we see the abundance in the capacity and in the potential of artists in enabling change every day. But I prepared a list to try to answer this question. So the arts have ways of speaking truth to power in places where maybe the truth could not be spoken. Artists can tell stories that need to be told and shine light into the voices that are not being heard. Art can touch us, move us, and broaden our understanding of climate justice in ways that we are not used to thinking. It can change behaviors of individuals and communities. Art is, in its nature, participatory. It promotes knowledge exchange, inclusivity, and diversity. It can build bridges between disciplines and systems of thinking. Through creative practice, we can prototype new ideas, design and model innovation. Art can be a catalyst for personal feelings and collective emotions, especially in times of rapid change. It can also be a force against misinformation and polarization. There's a recent research that found that artistic visualization data through art increased climate engagement. And art can be a place to imagine new ways of existing, of collaborating, and of relating to the world around us. And it can be a very powerful tool for mobilizing people. And I could go on, we could go on with this list. But I will use, I think it's a quote that I love. I used it last week before. It's from a feminist writer, African-American writer, filmmaker, artist, and activist called Toni Kadebambara. And she says that the role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. So I think it's a very beautiful, but if I can say something as well, because I'm giving this beautiful list of the possibilities, but I think it's, as Rosario, my colleague Rosario has mentioned, and all of us have been mentioning, it's like there's this beautiful opportunities of the sector, but it would be irresponsible for me not to mention what's going on, to reinforce the risks, the attacks, the persecution, the vilification, everything that's happening to artists everywhere in the world. And the indigenous artist that I mentioned in the beginning, Shirley Krenak, she is also an environmental defender that has been for years receiving death threats because she's on the front line of this fight against free mining companies in Brazil, which is Vale, BHP, and Samarco, who were responsible for the biggest environmental crime that ever took place in Brazil when a mining dam broke and killed a whole river and affected the livelihoods of over 1.6 million people. So I think it's important to honor that as well. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for the point about being responsible, because it is true we should promote the role, but we have to be aware that when we promote the role, we also encourage professionals to engage, and it's not always that safe for them, so we have to have the protection mechanisms ready as well. We are way behind schedule, not because of us, but because we started too late, but we have to respect, so we have to be a bit creative in our program. I know our director, Gustavo Marino, would have to leave now, and he is excused because we are late, so please feel free to leave the stage. And applaud for him. Yes, thank you. So what we will do now, dear audience, we promised that you were able to ask us questions. We will keep your questions. And now what we will do is a very quick round of interactive exchange among the panelists that are back. And what we would like you to focus on is this map on Biosphere Reserve. You see it there. It's very nice. It's a prototype of Biosphere Reserve. UNESCO has 750. And in and around that Biosphere Reserve, you have scientists working. And you have, when it's good, when it is functional, you also have partnerships with media and artists. And the question, we have three, is how to enhance protection of professionals, how to reinforce access to information, and how to counter misinformation and disinformation. And we are talking about biosphere reserves, and we want to insist on this in order to make ourselves more concrete in our discussions. So please, dear panelists, let's take 5 minutes where you digest what you've heard across sectors. That is what I would like to encourage you to do. I would like to invite Antonio to the scene as well. Let's start with the fact that, Victoria, you actually, as a journalist, covered biosphere reserve issues in Ukraine, and you explained to us how difficult it was to get access to information of the biosphere reserves. Maybe Serena and Victoria, would you like to start some reflections around that to kickstart our discussions? And please, Antonio, go take a seat here. And after 5 minutes, we will then move on to the last part of our program, which is to hear from our keynote listeners, and more about that in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. As I said, networking is the main thing for journalists, and I think that it would be great, it could be great to have a common platform for journalists and scientific community and members of art industry and maybe for eco-activists and other people from the sphere to share information between them and to maybe to make the requests there about information and something else and get help from other participants of that platform. And if we will say about biosphere reserves that should share the information and make it clear, they also can share that information on that platforms. It will be great to have news feeds for journalists and to have clear forms of information without difficult words, without big tables, with infographics, so anyone can understand that information. That was my idea.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So just to give a little brief introduction, and here we have the core zone, or the nuclear zone of the biosphere reserves, which is primarily dedicated to conservation. And what we find in these core zones is that this is really the area of management focus for many of the biosphere reserve managers, and they provide data to the extent that they can on what's going on here. But around that we have the buffer zone, I'm thinking in Spanish, which is dedicated to research, to education, to economic development that's really prioritizes natural development. And we often lack a lot of information about what's going on in this area and why it's so important to the biosphere reserve, to conservation, and also to the people who live here. And then finally, in the transition zone, we have the communities, the indigenous peoples, the local communities that are working, and maybe larger scale industries as well, agriculture and other kinds of industries. And here we almost never have data and information about what's going on here. But the whole idea with the biosphere reserve is that all three of these zones are managed together. And that's why the role of the people involved, the scientists, the journalists, the artists, the local communities and indigenous peoples is so crucial. And I thank Tiago for giving such a wonderful idea that we need all of these people advocating for the importance of conservation and showing how human well-being is intricately and inevitably linked to the well-being of the biosphere reserves and vice versa. And this is where we need to have systems of monitoring and information that share all of these different elements. And we talk about socio-ecological, not economic, socio-ecological integrated monitoring systems. But to have those powerful voices that can translate that into something that really hits your heart is where artists are so crucial. And we see, as Tiago said, often the artists and the activists are the same people. There's a lot of overlap there. So I'll leave that there.
Thank you very much for this elaboration. Clearly, there is a task for us to improve the information system. You mentioned that already, Antonio, earlier on. We have 1 minute left before we'll go to the keynote listeners. Maybe, Antonio, you want to add something, and Tiago as well, very quickly.
Yes.
Yeah.
This works? Yes. Okay. I will share an experience that I had in my life. So I'm now at UNESCO as director of the program, but in the past I was a scientist. I play musical instruments, so art. And there was a time in my life that I was invited to help to implement a biosphere reserve in a very remote area in a very poor country. So when I was discussing with the president of the government of that place, who should be and how we should set up the management of the biosphere reserve, I made a proposal to him. I don't want your scientist, I don't want your director of the natural park, although the biosphere reserve was based on 83% of the natural park. I invited him to nominate as the coordinator a journalist. So the person that was trained on communication, because the main issue of that biosphere reserve will be how to ensure that communities and everybody will be on board. So one of the first things that we did afterwards was to go to the local radio and to set up a program called the Biosphere Reserve Hour. Every week there was a radio program live, and this was the most listened program in the community. So maybe we need to come back to what Seren was just mentioning and see that this is not a science program. It is a scientific-based program, of course, but it is about governance and a different way. It's not about protected areas, but how to bring protected areas as a pillar for socioeconomic development. And socioeconomic development means human development, means the understanding that we were listening about how landscape shapes our personality. But by keeping that personality as in with integrity, we are ensuring that the soil will be there, that water will be there, that nature will be there, not only in the core zone, that will come to the, because the birds and the plants, if we succeed in the core zones, they will come out and they will live. And everything that we do in a school or in a big city, in a big town, we are doing for conservation when we teach artists, when we teach students in schools, when we do research, when we implement circular economy in big industries. So this is the problem. We need to practice what we say about multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary. It's no longer an issue for the director of the natural park, and member states must understand this, and we need to interact that when you are submitting an area that is based, of course, it's part of the regulations that you need to have a locally, nationally, or whatever protected area, but that is just one part, one of the dimensions. So we need to bring this, and communication will be decisive for this. As it was said also for, we are called to go there, but we can't go. Even if there is no bombs now, there is mines. So, and we cannot deal with plants and animals as we deal with a church or a physical monument. So we need to understand this. It's very difficult to explain. So it's a dynamics that we need to cope and adapt. Otherwise, we will not be doing our job very well. Thank you. So we need critical voices. That's
Thank you so much. Tiago, I was hoping I could say you get the final word, but if you can do it in like 30 seconds, and then we will go to the keynote listeners.
Okay, 30 seconds. I'll sing.
Possible.
No.
Yeah.
No, I will invite everyone to introduce themselves from now on to other people as the biome where you're from, because I think it will change practice, change the reality. And I was just going to say from my experience working with indigenous communities in the Amazon, one thing that changed a lot our perspective in the way that we engage with those communities, was very much the looking at the roles of activists, of journalists and scientists through a more holistic perspective as well, and understanding that indigenous communities are journalists, they are scientists, they are within their systems of knowledge, they are producing knowledge in ways that our disciplines of knowledge are not looking at, and empowering those communities and creating capacity building and reframing the way that we see their role can be one of our best allies in managing all of this. So I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very important. Reframing their role. That's a good sentence. We have two from our Danish team. Mads Wolf, who is Denmark's representative in the Man and the Biosphere Council. Denmark is a member of that council for 4 years, and all of the discussions we've had here will inspire how Denmark will behave in the Man and the Biosphere Council. Please share your quick takeaways, very quick takeaways. I'm sorry for that mess. And then we'll move to Morgan's and we will have to conclude. Over to you, Mads.
Yes, thank you. I'll try to do it fast. I think this event, I mean, there are so many things we could highlight here, but I would like to go to the local level. Because it is in the local where we see the problems very tangible. It's where they become extremely, I mean, you can feel them, you can sense them on your body. It's where it becomes dangerous. It's where it becomes problematic. But when we're talking in these global events, very often, like we had yesterday, there was a side event on what can the global system do, another one, what can the state level do. But we are very often missing the point about what can the local do. And most importantly, we are missing the point that we need multi-level governance. We need to have systems where they communicate, we are aligning what is done on the different levels. Because we can do the global things, we can do the state level things, but we are forgetting the locals. We need multi-level governance perspectives brought in on the center stage. And that is the second point leading up here is that the global and the state level needs to create enabling environment for local actions. And to provide better conditions for localized strategies and make us all able to work with place-based sustainable development instead of what we're doing now mostly, which is generic bottom-up implementation strategies. We need to turn it upside down. I also very much inspired by you, Thiago. You talked about the role of arts. I would continue your words. Arts put a challenge to our mental position, as you talked about, Antonio. Arts create culture. Art change culture. And that is what we need. And that is also why it's become so dangerous, because it's threatening existing positions. So we need to defend this. We need to defend the right for artists, for scientists, and for journalists. And I would then finally also just remind ourselves, I think I was also inspired by what you said, Antonio, about we need to change our position, our mental position, and quote then Director General Azoulay, who last year said something like, we must develop a new form of environmental ethics where human learns to preserve biodiversity by living with it rather than isolating it. And I think it's very important to have this in mind when we're talking about what is it actually we are facing. We're facing the protection of rights, but we are also in the middle of a transition, a very important and strong and dangerous and difficult transition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Briefly introduce Morgan Spliger, who is Denmark's representative in UNESCO's International Council for Development of Communication. And you have also been inspired by our discussions. Let's hear what your takeaways are, and very briefly as well. Thank you.
I shall be very fast. Thank you very much. I'll just take up the challenge from you, Thiago. I'm a migrant bird, and so I think it was really a good idea. I really hear that the overall conclusion here is more cooperation, more collaboration between among the three professions, because we need these common platforms. I think Victoria, you mentioned it very clearly that it would be great to have more common platforms because you will need each other. Many times during these days, it has been mentioned about the 44 journalists killed in the biosphere areas. We hear that there are also harassment, there are violence and killings of scientists and artists as well, but we haven't got the figures. So it's clear, and you said, all of you, that we need more monitoring on this. And we need the data, we need the monitoring to be able to react. This is something that I think we really have to bring back. When I'm sitting here listening to things like this, I always go into solution mode. So please allow me also to give a few solutions, a few ideas at least, maybe not solutions. We also learned about the new program for safety, for science safety. And what is the great thing with having looking at the biosphere, the man of the biosphere, is that we can be very concrete in the way that we are doing this. So that's a good starting point. There are practical examples on how to monitor scientific freedom. We have the Safe Science from Netherlands. In Denmark, where I'm working on a new monitor academic freedom program, which also is a monitoring unit that could be used and to develop indicators. And we have scholars at risk that are also dealing with these things. And I think it's important to look at those. And when to connecting partners, I think, and this is some of the things that came to me, training, not only training for the different professions. I believe that you could have more common training. Bring the journalists, scientists, and artists together when you train, because then you will learn from a lot of things from each other. That could be a takeaway from here. And I came to it when you talked about the handbooks, Sylvie. We should not just reproduce and just make a new handbook for scientists, a new handbook for artists. I think it would be good here to use this to make more common cooperative training. And during these days, I've heard a lot about strengthening network and also strengthening the organization of the different professions. No, such a thing, a very basic thing as strong unions, strong associations, strong organizations, because then you will have better possibilities to cooperate and talk to each other. So this is, I think we are running out of time, so this is the word from the migrant bird, soon getting north, soon flying north.
Thank you very much, and very good and important points that we should follow up on. Now, last slide on our screen. I hope we can get it on, because this is to say to all of you, let's continue the conversation. The Danish team is based in UNESCO headquarters with the ambassador, myself, and Marie, who is somewhere in the room as well. Please do not hesitate to contact us or UNESCO or any of the experts who were here today. Take a picture of this slide and let's continue the conversation. Thank you so much for your precious time. I know it's Saturday and we are not late. We are just respecting our 1.5 hour, but our apologies anyway for being a bit late somehow. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise.
guys need to make a change over.
Of course.
If you need any help, just let me know.
No. So this I will leave, is that okay?
You didn't have to give your ID for this? Production did give you this?
Somebody will, like we can, I will, yes, this is mine, I will do this.
He will have to take them then.
And then
Whoever
this I
took
will
them?
do.
Yeah.
Yes.
¿Ah? Sí, están ahí. Como eran 12 sillas, preferimos cambiarlas para que no fuera... Me asusta que se hayan llegado. Sí, están ahí, están ahí. Hey. Check. Uno, dos. Aquí está los dos prendidos. Este, check. Este es el que si sale. El segundo. Ahí lo vemos. No, pero estamos sobrados. Acá. A las tres. Sí. Me comí. Gracias.
Yes, we're good. Just waiting for Charlotte. We start. So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this panel session where we will explore the role of digital content creators, climate activists in addressing the climate crisis. My name is Adeline Hulin. I'm the head of unit for media information literacy at UNESCO HQ. And to discuss this topic, I am here together with 5 fantastic speakers, which I'm going to introduce to you in a second. But before that, I just want to say a few words about this session and why we are organizing this session today. In fact, we are witnessing that more and more individuals, especially the youth, are diverting from traditional media, and they rely more and more on social media in order to access public interest information, and this is also becoming their main source of information. And especially, we see that for the environmental discussion, for the climate change discussions. And their voice has become, the voice of young activists and digital content creators has become really key on social media to raise and sound the alarm about the urgency to do something and act on environmental crisis. But on the downside, what we see is that social media have become as well an echo chamber for mis and disinformation, notably in relation to environmental issues. In 2023, the Climate Action Against Disinformation Coalition released a report that found serious deficiencies in how social media platforms address climate disinformation. So here we have the digital content creator with their actor that have a wider influence right now